handcuffed on her own front lawn while her neighbors watched over their barbecue grills. Erin Callahan didn't look like a mother of two. She looked like a criminal mastermind. As the police shoved her toward the cruiser, Thomas leaned in, his face a mask of grieving husband for the cameras, and whispered the words that chilled her bone deep. "The confession is already in your desk, and the kids are never coming back." He had erased her life, stolen her identity, and now he was using her own digital signature to send her to prison for a crime he committed. Erin's gaze flickered to the garage, where a smashed laptop lay in pieces and a woman she thought was a mistress stood trembling in the shadows. She had one chance, one hidden wire, and a password that shouldn't exist. As the sirens began to wail, the crowd didn't see a victim. They saw a monster, but as Erin felt the cold steel of the cuffs bite into her wrists, she realized the man she had been married to for 10 years wasn't just a liar. He was a ghost who had been dead for a decade. Now, she had to decide how much of her soul she was willing to burn to prove she was still alive. The attic smelled of mothballs and old paper, the kind of scent that clung to the back of Erin's throat like dust. She knelt on the warped floorboards, fingers brushing against the rough cardboard of a box labeled Christmas 2012. The year Thomas had promised they'd finally get the tree with the angel topper she'd wanted since childhood. The box sagged under her weight, its seams groaning as she pried it open. She wasn't looking for ghosts, just the string of outdoor lanterns for the neighborhood block party. But the attic had a way of offering up things long forgotten. Dust motes danced in the single beam of light, filtering through the small, grime-streaked window, illuminating a graveyard of suburban life, a broken stroller, a stack of architectural digests, and a vintage red and white cooler tucked behind a mountain of winter coats. As she shifted a heavy plastic bin to reach the lanterns, her foot caught on the edge of a loose floorboard, prying it up just enough to reveal a sliver of dark wood. Curiosity, or perhaps a lingering instinct she'd suppressed for a decade, nudged her. She reached into the hollow and pulled out a heavy manila envelope. The paper felt thick, expensive, and entirely out of place among the discarded holiday tinsel. Inside, she found a deed of trust for a townhouse in Wheaton, a property she had never visited, in a town Thomas claimed he only traveled to for boring municipal zoning meetings. The name on the buyer line was Thomas Callahan, but the notary stamp was dated 3 years ago, during a summer he'd spent supposedly grinding away on a skyscraper project in Chicago. Her pulse thrummed in her ears, loud as the radiator hissing in the corner. Erin spread the papers across her knees, the ink sharp as a fresh cut against the yellowed parchment. It wasn't just the deed. Beneath it lay a series of Social Security cards, each bearing Thomas's face, but different names. Richard Voss, Stephen Thorne, David Miller. The signatures varied, some looping and confident, others tight and cramped. But the eyes in the photos remained that same icy, impenetrable blue. A coldness that had nothing to do with the drafty attic air washed over her. Her 10-year marriage, the mortgage, the shared bank accounts, even the memories of their late daughter's first steps. It all felt like a house of cards caught in a sudden, violent gale. She realized with a sickening jolt that she didn't know the man sleeping beside her. He wasn't an architect. He was a curator of ghosts, a man who built lives out of stolen paper. The silence of the house was shattered by the heavy thud of the front door downstairs. Thomas's voice carried up the stairs, muffled but cheerful, carrying that effortless charm that had once made her feel like the luckiest woman in the world. "Babe, you up there?" I grabbed the extra bags of ice and those fancy sliders from the deli. His footsteps began to rhythmically climb the wooden stairs, each creak sounding like a countdown. Panic, sharp and metallic, tasted like copper on her tongue. She scrambled to shove the documents back into the envelope, her movements frantic and clumsy. She tucked the manila folder back into the floorboard gap, smoothing the dust over the wood just as the attic door groaned open. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a trapped bird seeking exit. But she forced her features into a mask of mild domestic frustration. "Just looking for the lanterns, Tom," she said, her voice sounding thin and reedy to her own ears. She didn't look at him, instead focusing on a tangled knot of green wire. She could feel him standing in the doorway, his presence suddenly massive, blotting out the light from the hallway. He didn't move. He didn't offer to help. He just watched her with that terrifyingly still intensity he used when he was calculating a floor plan. Or a lie. "You've been up here a while," he remarked, his tone casual, yet underlined with a serrated edge of suspicion. Erin forced a small, tight laugh, the kind she used when a student at school was being particularly difficult. "You know how it is. I got distracted by the old Christmas photos. I'm fine, just dusty." She stood up, brushing her hands on her jeans, her wedding ring catching the light, a gold band that suddenly felt like a shackle. She needed a record. If she walked out now, he would move the evidence, and she would be the hysterical wife once more. As Thomas descended to start the grill, his footsteps fading into the kitchen, Erin lunged back for the floorboard. Her hands trembled so violently, she nearly dropped her smartphone. She began snapping photos with a surgical precision born of pure adrenaline. Click, the wheat indeed. Click, Richard Voss's passport. Click, a ledger of offshore accounts she didn't recognize. She watched the little blue bar on her screen as the images uploaded to her cloud storage, a digital lifeline being cast into the void. Each photo felt like a nail in the coffin of her old life. She wasn't just a guidance counselor anymore. She was a witness to a crime she was still trying to name. The attic felt like it was shrinking, the insulation-lined walls pressing in on her. She needed a professional, someone who knew the language of paper. She retreated to the darkest corner, behind a stack of moth-eaten blankets, and dialed a number she hadn't called in years. Sarah Whitmore, a friend from college who now worked as a senior clerk at the county records office, picked up on the third ring. "Erin? Is everything okay? I haven't heard from you since the funeral." Erin's voice was a jagged whisper. "Sarah, I need a favor. A big one. Don't ask why, just... I'm sending you an address in Wheaton. Can you check the title? Tell me who really owns it. Please." She could hear the hesitation on the other end, the sound of a keyboard clacking. "Erin, you sound terrified. What's going on?" "Just check it, Sarah. Please." The minutes that followed were a vacuum of time. Erin sat on the dusty floor, clutching her knees, listening to the muffled sounds of the neighborhood block party beginning outside, the clink of bottles, the distant thump of classic rock. Then, her phone vibrated. It was Sarah. Her voice was no longer warm, it was clinical, shaken. "Erin, I don't know where you got that deed, but the Wheaton townhouse isn't owned by anyone named Callahan. It's held by a holding company called Voss and Associates. And Erin? That company is flagged in our system. It's been linked to a series of embezzlement investigations at the state level. Whoever gave you that paper is using it as collateral for loans that don't exist. It's a shell, Erin. It's all a shell." The ground seemed to tilt beneath her. Thomas wasn't just hiding a house. He was laundering a life. The attic door creaked again. But this time, there was no warning shout. Thomas was simply there, his silhouette framed by the harsh hallway light. He wasn't wearing his approachable architect smile anymore. His icy blue eyes scanned the room, landing on the shifted floorboard and the corner of the manila envelope she hadn't quite hidden. The air in the cramped space turned volatile, thick with the scent of unmasked malice. "Who were you talking to, Aaron?" he asked, his voice dropping into that dangerously calm register. He stepped into the room, closing the distance with the predatory grace of a man who had spent his life avoiding being cornered. He blocked the stairs, his broad shoulders filling the exit. "I told you to stay out of the old boxes. I told you there was nothing up here but junk. It's not junk, Tom. Or should I call you Richard? Or Stephen?" The words were out before she could stop them, a frantic burst of courage that she immediately regretted. Thomas's face didn't crumple. It hardened into something stone-like. "I've done everything for this family," he hissed, stepping closer. "I built this house. I paved your way. And you're going to throw it away because you went digging where you didn't belong?" He lunged, his hand snapping out like a trap to grab her wrist. His grip was bruising, his knuckles white. "Give me the phone, Aaron. I know you took pictures. Give it to me, and maybe we can talk about this." He pinned her against a stack of heavy plastic bins, his weight crushing the breath from her lungs. Desperation lent her strength she didn't know she possessed. Her hand, flailing for purchase, brushed against the cold, pitted metal of the vintage cooler on the shelf beside her. She gripped the handle, a heavy, rusted thing, and swung it with a guttural cry of rage. The corner of the cooler caught Thomas squarely on the shin. He let out a sharp, choked yelp of pain, his grip loosening just enough for her to twist away. She didn't wait. She shoved him with both hands, sending him stumbling back into a precarious tower of boxes containing old textbooks and ceramic ornaments. The crash was deafening in the small space, a cacophony of breaking glass and heavy thuds. Thomas cursed, struggling to find his footing amidst the debris, his face contorted in a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. Aaron didn't look back. She dived for the floor, her fingers closing around the original Social Security cards that had spilled from the envelope during the struggle. She shoved them into her waistband and scrambled for the attic stairs, her sneakers skidding on the plywood. She flew down the ladder, her heart a frantic drumbeat in her throat. She could hear him recovering, the sound of boxes being kicked aside, his voice a low growl of, "Aaron, get back here." She hit the hallway floor and ran, not for the front door where the neighbors were gathered, but for the side door leading to the garage. She burst into the humid afternoon air, her lungs burning, and fumbled with her car keys. The engine roared to life just as the side door of the house flew open. She backed out of the driveway in a spray of gravel, her hands shaking so hard she nearly clipped the mailbox. As she swung the SUV onto the street, she glanced toward the sidewalk. There, standing by a neatly trimmed hedge, was Mr. Henderson. The elderly man, usually seen clipping his roses with harmless precision, wasn't waving. He stood perfectly still, his watery blue eyes fixed on her with a chilling, knowing intensity. As their eyes met, his lips curled into a slow, sinister smile. Not the smile of a neighbor, but the smile of a man watching a predictable tragedy unfold. He knew. He had always known. The realization that the entire neighborhood might be a theater for Thomas's deception sent a fresh wave of nausea through her. She drove blindly for miles, finally pulling over in the parking lot of a closed strip mall. Her breath came in ragged gasps as she pulled out her phone. She needed to see it again, the proof that she wasn't insane. She scrolled through the photos until she reached the one she'd taken of a small, candid Polaroid tucked into Thomas's ledger. It showed Thomas at a gala, his arm around a much younger woman with wild dark curls and those same icy blue eyes. Not a mistress, but a mirror. She recognized the woman now. It was Maya, the daughter of the manager at the First National Bank where they kept their savings. The conspiracy wasn't just in their house. It was in the very vault that held their future. The trap was larger than she'd ever imagined, and the teeth were already beginning to close. The digital display on her dashboard flickered, a mocking reminder of the life she was leaving behind. 4:15 p.m. The block party would be in full swing now, a sea of checkered tablecloths and forced laughter. She tried to log into her banking app, her fingers hovering over the screen. Incorrect password. She tried again, her heart sinking. Account locked. Please contact your administrator. Thomas had anticipated her flight. He was already erasing her, turning the digital keys in the locks. She tried the security questions. What was the name of your first pet? But the answers she knew were rejected. He had rewritten their history in the span of a few minutes. She was financially stranded in a car with a half-tank of gas, carrying a pocket full of forged identities and a phone full of secrets he was likely already tracking. A notification pinged at the top of her screen, a banking alert she hadn't managed to disable. Transfer initiated, $85,000. Her stomach dropped. That was the children's college fund, the money her mother had left them, the only thing she had fought to keep separate. Thomas was liquidating their lives, turning their children's future into untraceable digital dust. She watched the progress bar in her mind, a countdown to total erasure. She had to go back. Not for him, but for the kids, who were still at the neighbor's house, oblivious to the fact that their father was a ghost and their mother was a fugitive. She shifted the car into gear, her jaw set. She would play the part. She would go back to the block party, put on the mask, and find a way to stop the vault from closing at sunset. The drive back felt like entering a war zone disguised as a carnival. As she approached the intersection of Maple and 4th, she pressed the brake pedal to slow for a stop sign. The pedal went soft, sinking all the way to the floorboards with a sickening hiss. No, 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 she whimpered, pumping the brakes frantically. The SUV didn't slow. It gained momentum on the slight incline. She swerved, narrowly missing a neighbor's parked minivan, her tires screeching against the asphalt. The emergency brake groaned as she yanked it upward, the vehicle fishtailing before coming to a jarring, smoking halt in a narrow alleyway behind the community center. She sat in the silence, the smell of burnt rubber filling the cabin, her hands frozen on the wheel. She climbed out, her legs like jelly, and knelt by the front tire. Even in the dimming light, the damage was unmistakable. The brake line hadn't snapped. It had been sliced with a clean, surgical precision, a professional cut. Thomas hadn't just wanted to scare her. He wanted her silenced before she could reach the authorities. The suburban dream was dead, replaced by a cold, calculated hit. She abandoned the car, slipping through the shadows of the backyards, moving toward her own house like a ghost. The back patio doors were standing wide open, the sheer curtains fluttering in the breeze like white flags of surrender. She had locked them. She knew she had. She stepped into the kitchen, the linoleum cold beneath her feet. The house was too quiet, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound. "Tom?" she whispered, though she knew he wouldn't answer. Suddenly, a shadow detached itself from the pantry. A man, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a dark hoodie and a tactical mask that obscured everything but his flat, shark-like eyes. He didn't speak. He didn't demand the phone. He simply moved, a blur of dark fabric and cold intent. He lunged at her with a short, serrated blade, the metal gleaming in the twilight. Aaron screamed, throwing a chair between them, the wood splintering as he kicked it aside. They crashed into the kitchen island, a chaotic blur of limbs and shattered spice jars. The struggle moved toward the open patio doors. Erin felt the sharp sting of glass cutting into her palm as they hit the floor, the man's weight crushing her. He was stronger, trained, his movements efficient. He pinned her arm, the knife inching toward her throat. In a moment of blind, primal survival, Erin's hand scrambled across the floor, her fingers closing around the heavy metal meat tenderizer she'd left on the counter earlier. She swung it with a frantic, overhead arc, the spiked metal face crunching into the intruder's wrist. There was a sickening pop of bone, and the man let out a muffled grunt of agony, the knife clattering onto the flagstones. He recoiled, clutching his shattered arm, and disappeared into the tree line of the woods behind the house. Erin slumped against the doorframe, her breath coming in ragged, sobbing gulps. Her vision blurred, but something caught the light on the kitchen floor. A small, black burner phone that had fallen from the intruder's pocket during the scuffle. She picked it up with trembling fingers, her blood smearing the plastic. The screen was unlocked. She scrolled through the recent calls, her heart stopping at the most recent entry. Sarah. 4:45 p.m. The same Sarah who had told her the property was a shell. The same Sarah who was supposed to be her oldest friend. The betrayal cut deeper than the glass. Sarah wasn't helping her. She was the lookout, the one feeding Thomas her location, her fears, her every move. A digital alert flashed on the burner phone. A countdown timer labeled Vault Sync. 58 minutes. The sun was dipping below the horizon, casting long, bloody shadows across the backyard. In less than an hour, the bank's digital vault would cycle, and the money, their life, their children's safety, would be gone, routed through Sarah's records office and into the void. She realized then that she was the only one who could stop it. But the neighborhood was already turning into a cage. She could hear the sirens in the distance, but they weren't coming for the intruder. They were coming for her. Thomas had made his move. She slipped out the front door, merging into the edge of the block party. The transition was jarring. Laughter, the smell of charcoal, the rhythmic thump of a Van Halen song. Thomas was there, center stage, a beer in his hand, leaning against a folding table. He was surrounded by a cluster of neighbors, the Millers, the Johnsons, even the school principal. He was gesturing emphatically, his face a mask of practiced, tragic concern. "She's just been under so much pressure," she heard him say, his voice carrying perfectly across the lawn. The school board audit, the loss of the pregnancy. "She's having a breakdown. If you see her, please, just call me. She's not herself." The neighbors nodded, their faces tight with that suburban pity that is indistinguishable from judgment. Before she could retreat, a hand gripped her shoulder. It wasn't Thomas. It was Officer Higgins, a man she'd seen at school assemblies for years. He didn't look at her with his usual friendly nod. His face was grim, his hand resting on the hilt of his taser. "Erin Callahan, you need to come with us." Behind him, another officer was already pulling a pair of steel handcuffs from his belt. "What? Why?" "My husband. Your husband called us, Erin. And so did the school board. They found the discrepancies in the counseling fund. Your digital signature is all over the illegal transfers." The trap had snapped shut. Thomas hadn't just stolen their money. He had stolen her reputation, using her own career as the weapon to bury her. As they led her toward the patrol car, the neighborhood watched in a silence that felt like a physical weight. She saw Mr. Henderson on his porch, sipping a glass of iced tea, his expression one of mild, detached interest. She saw the principal turn away, unable to look at her. But then she saw Maya. The bank manager's daughter was standing by the drink cooler, her face pale, her eyes darting toward the guest bathroom of the Miller house. Maya looked terrified, her hands twisting a silver ring around her thumb. It wasn't the look of a conspirator. It was the look of a hostage. Aaron caught her eye, a silent plea passing between them. Before the officers shoved her toward the car, "I need to use the bathroom," Aaron blurted out, her voice cracking. "Please, I'm going to be sick." Higgins hesitated, looking at the crowd, then at the pale, trembling woman in front of him. "Make it fast. Miller's house, right there. Don't even think about the back window." He escorted her to the door, staying in the hallway as she ducked into the small, beige-tiled guest bathroom. She wasn't alone. Maya was already there, leaning over the sink, splashing cold water on her face. The younger woman jumped, her icy blue eyes wide with fright. "I can't do it anymore," Maya whispered, her voice a broken thread. "He told me he'd release the photos of my father. He's ruining everyone, Aaron." Aaron grabbed Maya's shoulders, the handcuffs clinking softly. "The password, Maya. The vault sync. Give it to me, and I can stop him. I can save your father. I can save all of us." Maya's breath hitched. "He'll kill me." "He's already killing you," Aaron hissed, the desperation in her voice finally breaking through Maya's fear. Maya looked at the door, then back at Aaron. She grabbed a small notepad from the counter and scribbled a string of alphanumeric characters. A57 X99 VOS. It's the administrative override. He keeps the laptop in the garage, behind the false panel by the workbench. But you have to hurry. The sync starts in 20 minutes. Aaron slipped the paper into her shoe just as Higgins knocked on the door. "Time's up, Callahan." She was led back out into the fading light, the sun a sliver of fire on the horizon. She had to get to the garage. She had the password, but the evidence was still digital, still vulnerable. As they walked past the garage, a sudden commotion erupted near the grill. A grease fire, real or staged, sending a plume of black smoke into the air. The neighbors scrambled, and Higgins turned his head for a fraction of a second. It was all the time she needed. She ducked behind a row of overgrown hostas and vanished into the shadows of her own driveway. The garage was cold, the concrete floor radiating a damp chill. She found the panel, a seamless piece of plywood that yielded to a firm press. Inside sat the laptop, its cooling fan whirring softly. She flipped it open, the screen's blue light illuminating her face. Enter administrative password. Her fingers flew across the keys. Access granted. The offshore transfer window was open, a series of progress bars crawling toward 100%. She began the upload, routing the encrypted files to a secure server she'd set up months ago for school records. 90%. 95%. The door to the garage creaked open. Thomas stood there, the tire iron in his hand gleaming like a dull tooth. He didn't look like an architect anymore. He looked like the monster he had always been. "You always were too smart for your own good, Aaron," he said, his voice a low, melodic growl. He didn't hesitate. He swung the tire iron with a brutal, overhead arc, the metal shattering the laptop's screen in a spray of sparks and plastic. The blue light died instantly. Thomas laughed, a cold, hollow sound. "It doesn't matter. I already planted the confession in your office. The police have the signatures. You're a ghost, Aaron, and ghosts don't get to keep the money." He signaled the officers, stepping back and smoothing his hair, his face instantly shifting back into the mask of the grieving husband. "She's in here. She's destroying the evidence." Higgins and his partner burst in, seeing the shattered laptop and Aaron standing over it, her hands covered in dust and blood. They tackled her, the weight of the law slamming her into the concrete. Thomas leaned in close as they hauled her up, his breath hot against her ear. "You'll never see the kids again," he whispered, a final, jagged twist of the knife. "I've already arranged the transport. They're going to Grandpa Henderson's for the night. And then? Well, the world is a big place." The handcuffs bit into her wrists as they led her through the gauntlet of the block party one last time. The humiliation was total. Every eye in the neighborhood was a camera recording her downfall. But as the patrol car door opened, Erin felt a strange, cold clarity wash over her. The passive counselor was gone. In her place was something sharper, something forged in the heat of betrayal. She wasn't a victim anymore. She was a predator waiting for her opening. She reached into her hair, her fingers finding the heavy steel hairpin she'd tucked away during the attic struggle. She sat in the back of the car, the plastic seat cold against her legs. Higgins was in the front, radioing in the arrest, his attention focused on the paperwork. Erin moved with a silent, practiced efficiency she'd learned from a troubled student years ago. A kid who'd shown her how to slip a lock when the world tried to cage you. Click. The right wrist was free. Click. The left. She kept her hands behind her back, her breathing steady. She didn't try to run. She didn't scream. She waited. "I'm having a panic attack," she gasped, her voice sounding authentically ragged. "The kids. Henderson's house. I can't breathe." Higgins sighed, the frustration of a long shift evident in his slumped shoulders. He turned around, looking at the pale, sweating woman in his back seat. "Just take a breath, Erin. We're almost at the station." "My phone," she pleaded. "I need to call my sister. Just for a second, please. I'm going to pass out." Higgins hesitated. He knew her. He'd seen her talk kids down from ledges. He reached into the evidence bag and handed her the phone, his guard lowered by a decade of suburban normalcy. 30 seconds. That's it. She didn't call her lawyer. She didn't call her sister. She opened her messaging app and sent the password Maya had given her, the real one, the one she'd memorized, to Agent Miller, a federal investigator she'd worked with on a cyberbullying case the year before. A77X99 Voss. Check the First National Vault. Sunset Sync. Now. She hit send just as Higgins reached back for the phone. "That's enough. Let's go." As the car pulled away, Erin looked out the window at Thomas, who was standing by his SUV, talking to Sarah. They looked like a couple in a catalog, successful, polished, untouchable. But then, Erin leaned out the window, her voice a low, steady chime that cut through the evening air. "Hey, Tom. Tell Sarah I said thanks for the Wheaton deed, and tell your sister Maya I'm sorry about the wire." Thomas froze. The color drained from his face, leaving it a sickly, grayish white. He looked at Sarah, then at the garage, then back at the patrol car. The realization hit him like a physical blow. Maya wasn't his mistress. She was the sister he disowned, the one he'd blackmailed into his scheme. And the wire? Erin hadn't planted one, but the lie was enough to shatter his composure. He saw the federal SUVs turning the corner, their sirens silent, but their lights flashing a rhythmic red and blue warning. The facade collapsed. Odd. Thomas bolted for his SUV, his movements frantic, the tire iron clattering onto the driveway. He backed out in a blind panic, his tires screaming against the asphalt. He didn't see the fire hydrant at the end of the block. He didn't feel the brakes fail, the same professional cut he'd intended for Erin, now visited upon him by a twist of fate or a final, desperate act by Maya. The SUV swerved violently, the steering wheel a useless circle of plastic. It slammed into the heavy iron hydrant with a bone-jarring crunch, a geyser of water erupting into the air, drenching the neatly manicured lawns. Agent Miller stepped out of the lead federal vehicle, her dark curls wild in the wind, her badge gleaming. She didn't look at the wreckage. She looked at Aaron. "We got the sink, Aaron. The funds are frozen. And we found the real Thomas Callahan. Or rather, the man who used to have that name. He's been in a potter's field in Ohio for 15 years. The man in the SUV wasn't her husband. He was a professional identity thief, a ghost who had inhabited her life like a parasite." The block party was over. The lights were flickering out, the neighbors retreating into their houses, their curtains drawn tight against the truth. Aaron stood in the spray of the fire hydrant, the water washing away the dust of the attic and the blood of the kitchen. She lost the house, the cars, the perfect life. But as she watched the man who called himself Thomas being led away in real federal shackles, she felt a weight lift that she hadn't even known she was carrying. 6 months later, Aaron sat in a small, sun-drenched apartment in Over the Rhine. The walls were bare except for a few photos of her children and a flyer for a new support group. She wasn't a guidance counselor anymore. She was an advocate. She spent her nights helping women navigate the labyrinth of financial abuse, showing them how to find the hidden deeds and the forged signatures. She was no longer maintaining appearances. She was no longer the good wife who stayed quiet to keep the peace. She was real. And as she looked out at the city skyline, the sun setting behind the buildings, she realized that the most beautiful thing about a house of cards is how much light gets in once it finally falls.